G'day traders, we're going to wrap up of Wednesday the 25th of July. So we ended up finishing the day up the second last green candle here. So we finished it out, we had a really solid surge from the buyers through the middle section of the day and towards the afternoon. We started off pushing down and then we came back. I'll certainly make this a little bit more clear on the 5-minute charts and even look at some 15-minute charts, but still we're dealing around this area we keep talking about, 1326. Looks like it's trying to hold and push higher. There was a certain stage during the market on Wednesday that I believed it was going to push higher again and really start to go, and a 15-minute chart showed this, but just didn't quite get there in the end, and then it started to again get some sellers and retrace back. I'll make that clear in a sec. I've got a trend line here also. This was quite relevant. We're now breaking down underneath it. Do keep it here because I mean this is like what they call this is vertical support and resistance. So what might happen is the market might come up and be interesting to see if it all of a sudden bounces off that, it makes this trend line really significant and it'll stay there. If all of a sudden we start pushing through it again, then we might look at taking it off. But until right now it's still relevant, so it'll stay there. So here we go on the 5-minute chart, starting over here, just a bit of a look at the overall relationship between the buyers and the sellers. We started by pushing up, and they certainly placed some pressure on these little bit of a swing highs here, and looked like they really wanted to head up. And then from there, you can see head down quite strongly. Then we formed some holding formations, and that's where they started to head up again. Just before I break it down a little bit further, here's the 15-minute chart leading up. So you can see that the power and the momentum certainly was on the upside. We had all these previous days where we were starting to come down, but basically each pre-market, this pre-market here, they're starting to show holding formations, remembering the overall formation or settlement of these markets is on the upside. Especially this particular day here, we started holding. You can see it was stepping up here. We've got above a significant level, looking to drive higher and really start coming up and placing some pressure on this levels up here. In the end, the market popped back and started to head higher, and you can see that they put some pressure on this little bit of a pivot here. Then they've failed to get above that, and then they've really started, this is where they pushed down. And then we got these buys, which we'll talk about in a second. This area here where we pulled back and thought it was possible to come back and put some pressure on these highs and break through. Just, the market keeps on wanting to do that. The buyers keep on having to go, yet these sellers, even though we're in a buyer's market, keep on sort of holding them back, and when you think the buyers are coming, the sellers will come back and have a go and say, not quite yet. So there's quite an interesting battle going on. But keep an eye on these medium-term markets. This 15-minute chart provides good direction as to where potentially markets could head to, and have a little bit more of a look of the the overall direction without sort of the being affected by some of the noise or some of the fluctuations you get on these short-term markets. So I think about this area here, we push down, we got underneath, there's a significant level here at 1335. We actually come back and have a look at that later on in the day as well, but the market bounced off it, then pushed through it. The 1-minute chart will show this a bit better. Came back up, tested it, and then from there they went lower again. This is where the sellers really started to drive down lower. Bit of a bobble here in the predictive average, not a lot, but it was quite a swift move. And then they quickly made the pressure shown on the downside again. So just after they were starting to get some momentum, you're seeing that there's a bit of a sideways patch here. This was through the lunchtime period. We're starting to get these step up formations, and they're starting to show signs of holding, and you can see the predictive average try to push down here, pop back up, then cross down here. So when you see something like that, it's a bit of it's certainly one I'd be very careful on the downside. Maybe back here if it crossed down, they'll certainly, and it crossed down a bit lower and it's close to these lows, that's an area that's going to put some pressure on its lows and possibly could go there. But when it's tried to go lower than it's popped up, that there's buyers in this particular area here, and then basically the predictive averages popped down and popped up again. And when you see that as they're basically making higher highs and lower lows, as it's crossing over again, this is a real indication that the direction is changing and looking to break. Then as soon as we get above this region, or this bit of what I call a bit of a pivot here, the market's just going to make a real fist of it, and most times the percentages are that it's all of a sudden going to, with that change of pressure comes power and momentum, and that's when it's going to really start to rock and roll and get going. And you can see that's the case. It just pushed straight back up to to almost the highs without any sort of pullback or anything like that. We did, when you look at the 1 minute chart, there was a bit of a slow down around this region, get above it, then bounce off it again, but nothing of real major significance there. Then we came back here, we pulled back, and then quickly jumped back out and tried to look at these highs. So this is the area where it looked like it was ready to go and maybe even push higher again. It just had that presence about it, but in the end the area's failed, and again we got back underneath this sort of region here, this support area. Once it did, there was a little bit of a release of pressure, and then it started pushing back down, and having basically a third trend for the day, and the sellers coming back in again. So here we go on the 1 minute chart, just to break it down a little bit further. Buyers coming in to start off with, that quickly turned around in this area here. If you really want to get a good indication of whether it's going to stick with this trend, normally if you look at the other markets, you want to see them all driving together, and then also you want to have a significant sort of price action within the area where you believe the markets could get support. Okay, so in an area like this, all the markets go together, and they were fairly consistent here. They all look like they want to head up, but there's not a real consistent level really until they get above this area here, where they can come back and hold and go higher from. You can see it's quite sparse. It's not a real, it's not until down here that there's some protection, and by this stage they're getting right back into the range. So as far as finding some sort of opportunity for this to hold and go higher from, I'm not saying it's not there. It's just a more difficult one. Whereas this one here, when we pushed down and all the other markets changed direction, started pushing down, it popped up. There's a level here, which on the longer term markets, there's certainly a level at 13.35, which is markets able to sort of get resistance off and then push down lower again. Bounce between power points here, and eventually they got some pressure to break down on the downside. Finally then, as it has bottomed out, and as far as how low it's going to go, I mean obviously that's not something that you can tell straight up, but that's where key levels and things like that have an important part. If you understand support and resistance, or no support and resistance area on longer term markets, you can see potentially where markets are going to run into an area where they should bounce or get a continuation. And then when you come into those areas, because 13.28 is a significant area on the market, when you come into those areas, so for example we got underneath it here, we hang sideways, then you can see there's quite a push, quite a thrust here. So you see these green candles here, they're pushing up with some sort of significance. So around this key level, and in key levels there's quite a few buyers and sellers and other people looking at this area. There's obviously, this is where the buyers are kind of lying around to potentially look and make the market go higher. It may not be so obvious around here. I mean, these green candles are certainly starting to look that way, that there's some power momentum back on the upside here, but you really need some sort of confirmation, and through this area here, as the market tries to step up and make higher highs and higher lows through this lunchtime period, this is where they start to show signs of potentially going higher. And then it was through here, especially around here, this power fade here, not a bad opportunity, because what we're doing is coming back up and placing pressure on this region here, which was a sideways region, and while we're contained within this area, it could potentially go down from, but all of a sudden you see the markets coming up and applying a pressure to it, and it breaks through, you're going to see a push up. You can see that it popped up, got out of the region, dealt sideways, and then eventually they've really gone on their way and gone higher and straight back to the highs quite rapidly. Then through this area here, this is quite interesting here. I think again 13.37 is a fairly key level. 13.36.50. This is where the markets kept on dealing around this price. You can see they've popped up to it here, they've popped down and tested it here, then they kept on sort of dealing around this area, and then you all of a sudden see some sort of thrust or movement, these areas here to push up higher. This is where I believe the market was going to get some sort of support, come back, use 37 as an area to really launch themselves from. It kept trying to do it, but in the end it just never eventuated. So not all areas come to fruition, but it got up there, and I guess the pressure was too much. This is a support and resistance area. They're either going to break through it or they're going to either bounce down off it. With this buyer's momentum, I thought I had a chance of pushing higher, but in the end that's not the case. And from there, they've popped back down. And again, once they started breaking this sort of sideways region especially areas that you believe that should hold. And once they don't hold, there's a real release of pressure, and you're going to see a change in direction come fairly quickly. Something like this, I mean, I would be careful of it. Okay, and you can have false moves because the overall pressure is certainly on the upside, so sometimes it can pop down a little bit and then come back up. Whereas one back here, when this started popping up, this is going with the sort of the overall sentiment of the markets, and they're due for some buyers, so it's really likely to keep on going. Whereas this one here, there's no reason saying it can't go down, but just be careful of false moves. It's more the percentage are that it could have a false move more likely than that previous area. Hopefully that makes sense. What I mean by that, and we push down a little bit lower and basically come back down into this 1330, 130 area where the market dealt a lot with around earlier on in the day, and that's where they're finding a bit of support, and then they got a bit of a bounce to finish off the day. So that's a wrap up for Wednesday, and we'll speak to you guys on Thursday.